11th District Courthouse in New York.
We've just been informed that what was thought to be the suicide of
Industrial genius Bjorn Faulkner has now become an alleged murder. In the courthouse right now, District Attorney Logan R. Flint is taking the deposition of prime suspect Karen Andre. Now, reliable sources have told WNDC that Karen Andre has been the alleged mistress of Mr. Faulkner for over 7 years. We have also recently learned that immediately following Mr. Faulkner's death, his business affairs went into financial distress, leaving many of his investors on the brink of ruin. Now, conspicuously absent today is Mr. Faulkner's bride of 6 months, Nancy Lee Whitfield Faulkner, the only daughter of millionaire John Graham Whitfield. Here's District Attorney Flint. Mr. Flint, where is Mrs. Faulkner? Is she a suspect in this case?
First off, let me declare emphatically that Mrs. Faulkner is definitely not a suspect in this case. As to her whereabouts, we're not certain of that at present. We believe that immediately following her deposition, her father took her to the family home, which is located in Northern California. She was quite emotionally distraught, as you can imagine, following the death of her husband. And I would urge her, if indeed she does see this newscast, that it is important that she call the district attorney's office. We would like to talk to her about some pertinent details surrounding the case, but I say again, she is not a suspect in the case.
What evidence do you have, sir, against Karen Andre?
We have quite a bit of evidence, Mr. DesRochers. We have physical evidence, which I can't go into any great detail about. We also have testimony from several key witnesses, which has been verified to be accurate and correct. And again, I cannot elaborate on that at this point, obviously, because we are going into a trial.
Now, how soon do you think the trial will begin?
Well, I know for a fact that Judge Margaret Heath has been appointed to be the judge to try the case, and she has indicated to the press that she would like to see this case be tried as soon as possible, due, of course, to the severity of the crime and the identity of the deceased. She has indicated that she would like to see the case go to trial as early as April 2nd.
Thank you very much. That is District Attorney Logan R. Flint. And as you can see by his comments, that Karen Andre is the only suspect in this case. Let's see if we can try to get a comment from Karen Andre coming out of the courtroom right now. Karen Andre, do you have any comments on this case?
Please, no.
Sure, Karen Andre.
I'm sorry, Miss Andre is not available for questioning at the time.
This is defense attorney Ann Stevens. Ms. Stevens, what defense will you use against the district attorney?
Well, we have many pieces of evidence that we will be using. One of them is a letter written by Mr. Faulkner himself and found in the penthouse that night.
Now, how does Karen Andre feel by being the only prime suspect in this murder against her boss?
Miss Andre is very shocked at the accusations, and she is working right now on building her strength, and she will be fine for the trial.
And what do you think, Ms. Stevens, that the outcome will be in this case?
Once the jury sees the circumstantial evidence of the prosecution, they will exonerate Miss Andre completely.
Thank you for your comments. What was originally thought to be a suicide has turned into what appears to be a rather bizarre murder case. Obviously, both attorneys believe they have a strong case. It remains to be seen how the upcoming trial progresses. We will keep you informed as the case unfolds. This is Dan DesRochers reporting for WNDC Channel 3.
help you stay here?
Certainly. We don't have a clerk yet. That's fine. We can introduce
Go see the
him
clerk.
later. Mr. Bailiff, how are you this evening? It's good to see you again. This is Lori Anderson. She's just joined the DA's office from Harvard Law School.
Don't take it yet.
Miss Duval, Lori Anderson. Just so you know her name and you know what you need to.
I know. Why are they out there then?
Where's our clerk of court? I see.
No, it's all right.
I'm sure he'll be joining us shortly.
I'm back. Do you have a witness list?
Didn't we get you one? We were supposed to.
I have a copy, but has it been updated?
Do you want to know who I'm calling today? Ready? It'll be Kirkland.
Are you coming? What's the name?
She didn't have
Since
shoes.
they seem to be busy, well,
Yes, I need to. Hi. Yes. A-N-D-R-A-R-E. Yes. Thank you. How are you? Are you all right?
this is our
Better. Much better.
list.
Okay.
So first,
Love and water?
this is the contributions and concierge.
Just going to warn you when your client know how personally we had the inquest
Private eye.
today. Please control your client.
No, you're always good to speak to before a play.
Body from
I see.
the top of the building.
While having known that I would tackle your client in the court, but she does anything, and I have my study. So keep in mind.
And did you need that list?
Yeah, let's check them out. Check housekeeper. I know it is. Are you taking the first one then?
Yes.
Just gonna sit in the same room. That's fine.
Yes.
So, Kirkland, Hutchins, Van Fleet, Sweeney, Jamie. That's fine. That's fine. So, don't look at them. Just stay in the character. Good. Don't worry, I can't.
Waiting for a clerk of court.
Now, if you remember, like I told you, if you feel sick, you need to let me know. And then I'll take you really, okay? Don't stay on the stage if you're sick. That's not good at all. I'm gonna go over and talk to the stenographer. You stay here and drink some water. Okay? Okay. Would you like to tell me why it's taking so long for us to get started?
I don't know. I think we're just waiting for this guy. Good. Are we all set?
Jerry's all set.
Okay, have
Is
a
it?
seat.
How are you?
I'm just fine.
Good, good, but we're early then, anyway. Is that right?
Yeah.
We're early.
We're early.
Just a moment to settle.
Yes, I got 7:32.
Good, good, okay.
Let's see if we get this thing.
Everything's fine. You ready to go? It's ready.
All rise. Superior Court number 11 of the state of New York. The Honorable Judge Margaret Keats presiding. You may be seated.
This is the largest house we've ever had.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
The prosecution is ready, Your Honor.
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
The clerk will draw a jury.
You are the panel in which the jury will be selected to try this case. 12 names will be drawn. As I call your name, please stand, answer present, and take a seat at the witness stand. Paul Wallace.
Would you please state your name?
Paul Wallace?
Please, a little more loudly, please.
Paul Wallace?
Thank you. What is your occupation, Mr. Wallace?
Supervisor.
I see. Mr. Wallace, have you heard any publicity surrounding this trial that you feel may prevent you from fairly trying this case?
No, I haven't.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. This juror is acceptable, Your Honor.
The defense accepts, Your Honor.
Barbara Muldoon.
Please state your name
Barbara Muldoon.
and your occupation.
I'm a production worker.
Have you or any member of your family been involved in a trial within the last 6 months?
No.
The defense accepts, Your Honor.
Prosecution finds this juror acceptable, Your Honor.
Bernie Shodak.
Would you please state your name?
Bernie Chodak?
Are you employed, Mr. Shodak?
No, I'm not. I'm retired.
Thank you. Have you ever met millionaire John Graham Whitfield?
No, I have not.
Thank you, Mr. Shodak. This juror is acceptable, Your Honor.
The defense accepts, Your Honor.
Eric Delisle.
Please state your name
Eric Delisle?
and your occupation,
I'm a
please.
student.
I'm sorry.
I'm a student.
You're a student. Mr. Delisle, are you an associate of the well-known criminal Lawrence Ice Regan?
No.
The defense accepts this jury, Your Honor.
Prosecution also finds this juror acceptable.
Joanne Reynolds.
Would you kindly state your name?
Joanne Reynolds.
Are you employed?
Yes.
What are you presently doing?
Secretary.
I see. Miss Reynolds, can you tell us, have you ever been to Sweden?
No.
Thank you, Miss Reynolds. This juror is acceptable.
The defense also accepts, Your Honor.
Dean Kamen.
Please state your name.
Dean Kamen.
Are you presently employed, sir?
Yes,
What is your occupation?
I'm a physicist.
Mr. Kamen, what kind of a car do you own?
I don't personally own a car.
You don't. Have you ever owned a Cadillac?
Not that I know of.
The defense accepts, Your Honor.
Prosecution also finds this juror acceptable.
Jan Verville.
Would you please state your name?
Jan Verville.
Could you state it into the microphone?
Jan Verville.
Thank you. Are you employed?
No, I'm not.
I see. Can you tell us, do you know or have you ever known the defendant, Karen Andre?
No, I haven't.
Thank you. Your Honor, this juror is acceptable.
The defense also accepts, Your Honor.
Roger Gameri.
Please state your name.
Roger Damaris.
And are you employed, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is your occupation?
School counselor.
Have you ever had any business dealings with the late Bjorn Faulkner?
No, I haven't.
Are you sure about that,
I'm
sir?
positive, yes.
The defense accepts.
Prosecution finds this juror acceptable, Your Honor.
Oh, thank you.
John Clayton?
Would you kindly state your name?
Yes, John Clayton.
What is your occupation, sir?
I'm a journalist.
I see. Mr. Clayton, do you believe that the defendant in a trial such as this is innocent until proven guilty?
Yes, sir, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Clayton. This juror is acceptable, Your Honor.
The defense accepts the jury, Your Honor.
Kimberly Carson?
Please state your name.
Kimberly Carson.
And are you employed?
Yes, I am.
And what is your occupation, please?
I'm a film and theater critic.
Ms. Carson, is that your last name? Carson? Yes. Have you ever frequented the club Shea O'Toole?
No, I have not.
Are you an associate of George O'Toole?
No, I've never met that gentleman.
The defense accepts, Your Honor.
Prosecution finds this juror acceptable.
Alan Caprillion?
Good evening, Mr. Caprillion.
Good evening.
Can you tell us, are you employed, sir?
Yes.
What is your occupation?
Meteorologist.
Thank you. Mr. Caprillion, can you tell us, have you ever been or are you now a terpsichorean?
No, I am not.
Thank you, Mr. Caprillion. This juror is acceptable, Your Honor.
The defense agrees, Your Honor.
Carol Dakota? Present.
Please state your name.
My name is Sister Carol Dakota.
And are you presently working, sister?
Yes, I surely am.
And would you please tell us your occupation?
I'm a college president.
Of which college?
Notre Dame College.
Thank you. Have you or any member of your family been a member of a law enforcement agency?
No.
The defense accepts.
Prosecution finds this juror acceptable, Your Honor.
Please rise. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to well and fairly try this case and render a true verdict? So help you God. Say, I do.
I do.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are the jurors who will try this case. At the end of each day's session, you will remain seated until the bailiff escorts you to the jury room. At the close of this trial, you will retire to the jury room where you will vote upon your verdict. I instruct you to listen to the testimony carefully and to pronounce your judgment to the best knowledge of your heart and mind. You are to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. Her fate rests in your hands. The district attorney may now proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on January 16th, near midnight, as the lights of Broadway blazed over crowded streets below, the body of a man came hurtling through space to crash a disfigured mass at the foot of the Faulkner building. That body had been Sweden's great financier, Bjorn Faulkner. He fell 50 stories from his luxury penthouse. A suicide, we were told. A great man, unwilling to bend before his creditors. A man who found the fall from the roof of a skyscraper shorter and easier than the descent from his tottering throne as the world's financial dictator. Only a few short months ago, behind every major business transaction in the world, stood that well-known figure, with an arrogant smile and the well-being of many businesses, large and small, in the palm of his hand. If money is this world's lifeblood, then Bjorn Faulkner was the heart of the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the world has just had a heart attack. And like most heart attacks, it was rather sudden. No one suspected the gigantic swindle that lay at the foundation of the Faulkner enterprises. Only a few days after his death, the financial world shook from the crash of his many businesses. Thousands of investors were stricken with a paralysis that follows an attack when that monster's heart stopped beating. 2 women ruled Bjorn Faulkner's life and his death. One of them you see before you today. Karen Andre, Bjorn Faulkner's efficient secretary and notorious mistress. But 6 months ago, Faulkner came to America to get a loan in the attempt to save his fortune. And fate sent him a means to save his own soul as well, in the person of the lovely young woman who is now his grieving widow, Nancy Lee Whitfield Faulkner. Faulkner thought he had found a new life in the virtuous innocence of his young bride. And the best proof of that is 2 weeks after his marriage to Miss Whitfield, he dismissed Karen Andre. He was through with her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one is not easily through with one the likes of Karen Andre. We can only guess at what hatred and revenge smoldered in her heart. A smoldering ember that burst into flame on the night of January 16th. Bjorn Faulkner did not kill himself. He was murdered. Murdered by the very delicate and capable hands you see before you today. The same hands that helped to raise Bjorn Faulkner high over the world and then sent him crashing down from as great a height into pavement as cold as this woman's heart. That is what the prosecution will prove to you during the course of this case. I thank you for your attention. Your Honor, the people call as their first witness Dr. Sally Kirkland.
Sally Kirkland? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Dr. Sally J. Kirkland,
And what is your occupation?
medical examiner of this county.
Dr. Kirkland, in the course of your duties, what were you called upon to do the night of January 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
Tell us, what did you find?
I found a body greatly mangled by a fall.
Was that all?
No, a closer examination revealed a bullet wound between the 4th and 5th interspace in the region of the heart.
Dr. Kirkland, based upon your examination, were you able to determine an exact cause of death?
It was impossible to determine. It could have been the wound or the fall.
In your opinion, Doctor, could a .32 caliber bullet have caused that wound?
Yes, it could.
Dr. Kirkland, how long after Mr. Faulkner had fallen from the balcony of the penthouse did you examine his body?
I reached the body about half an hour after the fall.
And based upon that examination, were you able to determine an exact time of death?
No, I could not. Owing to the cold weather, the blood had coagulated immediately, which makes a difference of several hours impossible to detect.
It is therefore possible that Bjorn Faulkner could have been dead longer than half an hour.
It is possible.
It is then possible that Bjorn Faulkner could have been dead before he fell from the penthouse balcony.
Yes, he could have been dead before the fall.
Thank you, Doctor. I have nothing further. Your witness, Counselor.
Thank you. Dr. Kirkland, you stated that Mr. Faulkner could have been shot and died before he fell from the penthouse. But can you state positively that he died as a result of that bullet wound?
No. Owing to the condition of the body, it was impossible to determine.
Is it possible that Mr. Faulkner was conscious and able to move after he was wounded?
Yes, it is possible.
Then is it possible that Mr. Faulkner could have shot himself and then leaped from that building?
He could, yes.
Thank you.
But...
That is all, Dr. Kirkland.
Your Honor, the people next call Mrs. Lurleen Hutchins.
Lurleen Hutchins? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is your name?
Mrs. Lurleen Hutchins.
And what is your occupation?
I'm the night concierge in the Faulkner building, sir.
Mrs. Hutchins, it's not necessary to lean into the microphone.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Mrs. Hutchins, did Bjorn Faulkner own business offices in that building?
Yes, sir.
Did he also own the penthouse on the roof of the building?
Yes, sir.
And who lived in that penthouse?
Mr. Faulkner did. That is, before he got married.
And after his marriage?
After his marriage, Miss Andre lived there, all by herself.
Now, Mrs. Hutchins, I would like you to think very carefully and tell us, did you ever see Mr. Faulkner visiting Miss Andre in the penthouse after his marriage?
Yes, sir. One time.
And when was that?
On the night of January 16th.
Would you tell us about that, please?
Yes, sir. It was about 10:30, and
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hutchins. How did you know that it was 10:30?
Well, I always go to work every night at 10 o'clock, and it was about 30 minutes after I had gotten there that the doorbell at the private entrance rang. So I went and I answered it. It was Miss Andre, and Mr. Faulkner was with her. I was surprised because Miss Andre has her own key, and most times she opens the door herself.
Were Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre alone?
No, sir. There was two other gentlemen with them.
And who were these two men?
I don't know, sir.
Had you ever seen them before?
No, sir, never.
Perhaps you could describe them for us?
Well, they were tall and sort of skinny, both of them. One of them had his hat pulled down over his face and his coat collar turned up. And he'd been drinking.
I know. How did you know that?
Well, the other gentleman had to help him into the elevator. His feet were so loose.
I see. Mrs. Hutchins, did Mr. Faulkner look worried?
No, sir. He seemed mighty happy.
Did he look like a man who might be contemplating self-destruction?
Which?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hutchins. Did he look like a man who might be thinking about killing himself?
No, sir. Less than he was going to die laughing.
Objection.
Objection sustained.
Now, what have I gone and done?
Nothing. Not a thing, Mrs. Hutchins. Just confine your answers to the questions, please. Were the others in the party happy as well?
Yes, sir. They was all laughing when they went up in the elevator, except the drunk one.
Mrs. Hutchins, did you see any of them leave that night?
Yes, sir. The first one came down about 15 minutes later.
And which one was that?
The drunk one. He came down in the elevator all by himself, but he didn't seem quite so drunk anymore. He could walk, but he staggered just a little bit, and he still kept his hat pulled down over his face. Well, I wanted to help him to the door, seeing the condition he was in, but he noticed me coming, and he hurried right out.
I see. And then what did he do?
Well, he got into a gray car. It was parked at the entrance and drove away fast. but the cops must have got him.
What makes you think that?
Well, I noticed a car that started right after he did, and it... What car?
The defendant will please keep quiet.
Thank you, Your Honor. If Miss Andre will allow me to do the questioning, I may be able to satisfy her curiosity. Mrs. Hutchins, I was just about to ask you, what car?
It was a big black one. A fancy Cadillac, I think. It was parked about 2 cars away from the first one.
I see. How many people were in that car?
I saw only one man, sir.
Mrs. Hutchins, what makes you think this second car was following the first one?
Well, I couldn't be exactly sure he was, sir. It just seemed kind of funny, both of them starting out together like that.
I see. Mrs. Hutchins, did you see the other gentleman leave?
Yes, sir. He came down about 10 minutes later.
And what did he do?
Nothing much. He just seemed to be in a hurry, and he went right out.
So at that point, that left Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre alone in the penthouse together.
Yes, sir.
Then what happened?
Well, then I went on about my work. It must have been, about an hour or so later when I heard some screams outside in the street. Then I saw Miss Andre running out of the private entrance, her gown all torn and crying to beat the band. So I followed her. We pushed through the crowd outside, and there was Mr. Faulkner, lying on the sidewalk all smashed to pieces.
And what did Miss Andre do?
She screamed and fell on her knees.
I see. Thank you, Mrs. Hutchins, that's all.
No, sir, that's not all. There's some more.
More? More what?
Well, just then some people came a-running up and tried to tell the policeman something.
What did they say?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know?
No, sir.
All right, Mrs. Hutchins. Then what happened?
Well, then the policeman took them all up into the penthouse.
I see. And tell us, did you go up into the penthouse with them?
No, sir. Just as they seen me coming, they shut the door.
Then you really don't know anymore, do you?
No, sir. Now that I come to think of it, I don't think I do.
Thank you, Mrs. Hutchins.
Just a minute. You stated that you had never seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage, with the exception of that night. Now tell me, do you always see everyone who enters the building at night?
No, ma'am. If the guest has a key to the penthouse entrance, he could come in and I wouldn't see him.
So Mr. Faulkner could have called on Miss Andre any number of times, and you wouldn't have seen him enter?
No, ma'am, because I don't spy on people. Whatever they do, I leave it at that.
That is all. Thank you.
You may leave the chair now.
Oh, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, the people next call Bernard Van Fleet.
Bernard Van Fleet? You solemnly swear to tell
Yeah, I do.
Your name?
Bernard Alexander Van Fleet,
Occupation?
private investigator,
Mr. Van Fleet, what was your last assignment?
shadowing Mr. Bjorn Faulkner
And who hired you to do that?
by Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
I see. Tell us, were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the night of January 16th?
I was.
Would you please tell us about that?
Well, certainly. Let's see here. Let's see. I started exactly 6:13 p.m. Mr. Faulkner leaves his Long Island home. He's wearing a tuxedo, drives a dark blue Mercedes. He is alone. High speeds all the way to New York.
I see. And where does Mr. Faulkner go?
He drives up to the Faulkner building and goes in. I wait outside in my car. At exactly 9:35 p.m., Mr. Faulkner comes out with Miss Andre. She's wearing an evening dress and a large corsage of orchids. They drive away.
And where did they go?
Well, nobody's perfect.
What do you mean, Mr. Van Fleet?
Well, you see, I kind of lost track of them.
You what?
Well, due to Mr. Faulkner's excessive speed and an accident.
What accident?
My left fender crashing into a truck. Damages to which fender charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
All right, Mr. Van Fleet. After you lost them, what did you do?
I returned to the Faulkner building and waited.
And what time did they return?
Let's see here. 10:30 p.m. exactly. A gray Lincoln follows them. Mr. Faulkner gets out and helps Miss Andre. While she rings the bell, Mr. Faulkner opens the door of the gray Lincoln. A good-looking guy, also wearing a tux, steps out, and together they help the third guy, who was wearing a large gray overcoat, and let's put it this way, he was definitely showing signs of inebriation.
Then what did you do, Mr. Van Fleet?
I left my car and went to Gary's Grill. I always allow myself time for nourishment. Every 4 hours while on duty. Then I sat at a window and watched the door of the Faulkner building.
And tell us, what did you observe?
Nothing. For about 15 minutes. Then the guy in the gray overcoat, the drunk one, comes out and starts the car, the Lincoln. Seemed like he was in a big hurry, drove away south.
Mr. Van Fleet, did you see the other gentleman leave?
The good-looking guy?
Yes.
Yeah. About 10 minutes later, he comes out and starts a car parked at the curb and drove away south.
I see. Had you ever seen Mr. Faulkner with either of these two gentlemen before?
No, first time I ever saw him.
Mr. Van Fleet, what did you do after they left?
I wait. Mr. Faulkner is now alone in the penthouse with Miss Andre. I'm curious, of course, professionally. So I go up to the top of the Brooks building. There's a nightclub up there. There's an open area off the dining room. You go out and you can see the penthouse clear as day. So I go out.
And what did you observe? And then, please?
I looked.
And then?
I yelled.
What did you see?
No lights. Karen Andre's white gown, visible in the moonlight. A man in a tux. Faulkner, leaning against the balcony. She pushes him with all her strength. He goes right over. Straight down.
Then what did you do, Mr. Van Fleet?
I rushed back into the dining room and yell about what I'd seen. A crowd follows me down to the Faulkner building. Oof, and we found a hell of a bloody mess. And Miss Andre, falling over it. Fit to kill.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet. That is all. Your witness.
Thank you, Mr. Flint. Mr. Van Fleet, would you please tell us when you started in the employment of Mrs. Faulkner?
On October 13th.
And would you please tell us the date of Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner's wedding?
October 12th, the day before.
My. Just the day before. In other words, Mrs. Faulkner hired you to spy on her husband the day after they were married.
So it seems.
What were your instructions when you were hired?
To watch every action of Mr. Faulkner and report in detail.
And had Mr. Faulkner been calling on Miss Andre after his marriage?
I don't know. He went to the Faulkner building every day. He may have gone up to his office, or he may have gone up to the penthouse, or she may have come down to his office. Whatever.
Did you report that to Mrs. Faulkner?
I did.
And did she seem worried?
I don't think so. Mr. Faulkner was the most devoted of husbands, and, well, he loved his wife dearly.
And how do you know that, Mr. Van Fleet?
Those are Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Now, Mr. Van Fleet, would you please tell us what time it was when you started to the nightclub on the Brooks building that night?
Let's see. 11:32 exactly.
And how long a walk is it from the Faulkner building to the Brooks building?
Exactly 3 minutes.
And what time did you reach the nightclub that night?
11:57 exactly.
So it took you 25 minutes exactly to get to the balcony of the club. What were you doing the rest of the time?
Well, They have dancing and other things.
And did you partake of the other things, Mr. Van Fleet?
Well, I had a couple of drinks, if that's what you mean. But you can't say I was impaired.
Oh, Mr. Van Fleet, I have said nothing of the kind. Yet. Now, you stated that you had seen Miss Andre pushing Mr. Faulkner off of the balcony. It was a distance away, in the darkness, and you were, well, just for the record, you just had a couple of drinks.
Hey, the drinks had nothing to do with it.
Mr. Van Fleet, are you quite certain that she was pushing him? Isn't it possible that she was struggling with him?
Struggling? Well, that's an awfully funny way of struggling.
Mr. Van Fleet, what were your instructions from Mrs. Faulkner before you came here to testify?
Mrs. Faulkner has not been here to instruct me. As everybody knows, she and her father left for California right after Faulkner's death.
And you haven't heard from them at all?
I have no record of it.
Because I'm wondering, Mr. Van Fleet, I'm wondering how much an eyewitness to Mr. Faulkner's murder would be worth to Mrs. Faulkner.
Your Honor, please, we object.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. That is all. No further questions.
Just a moment, Miss Stevens.
What kind of a car do you drive, Mr. Van Fleet?
A brown Yugo. Hey, I like it.
Did you happen to see anyone following the gentleman in the gray overcoat when he drove away that night?
I couldn't tell. The traffic was pretty heavy.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet.
Your Honor, the people next call Officer Edward J. Sweeney.
Edward Sweeney? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is your name?
Edward J. Sweeney.
And your occupation?
Patrol officer, 12th Precinct, NYPD, New York's finest.
Officer Sweeney, were you at the scene of Bjorn Faulkner's death on the night of January 16th?
Yes, sir, I was. My partner and I were just about a half a block away. We had just gone off of one of our coffee breaks.
I see. And, did you see and question Miss Andre?
Well, no, sir, not right away. Before I could do anything, that fella, Van Fleet, well, he rushed up to me and yelled how he'd seen her push Faulkner off the roof. So I made my way to the center of the crowd and nabbed her.
Tell us, how did Miss Andre react to that?
Well, she just stood there, and she stared at me for a minute. By then she started laughing. I thought she'd gone crazy.
Then what did you do?
Well, I ordered her held for questioning and called for backup. And then I took her up us in the elevator to examine the penthouse.
And tell us, when you got to the penthouse, did you find anything unusual?
Well, if you call a big hunk of Central Park on top of a Manhattan skyscraper unusual, I certainly did. When we got up there was a pond with trees and grass. I'm talking trees as big as this. And when we got inside, everything was velvet. I'm talking even the walls.
I'm sorry, Officer Sweeney. I'm afraid you misunderstood my question. I wasn't asking about the aesthetics of the penthouse. What I wanted to know was, did you find anything unusual that could be associated with Bjorn Faulkner's death?
Oh, that. Yes, sir. Found a letter in the living room. Saw it the moment I went in.
Where was it placed?
It was propped up on a table.
Mrs. Faulkner? Oh. Your Honor, please. This is a witness I've been trying to locate.
Very well.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I understand you wanted to call me as a witness, Mr. Flint.
I did, Mrs. Faulkner, but I thought you were in California.
Father was concerned over my health. He wouldn't allow me to come back. But I do feel that I must do my duty towards the memory of my husband.
Yes, if there's anything we can do to help, Mr. Flint, we'll stay.
I can only express my deepest appreciation. If you'll please both kindly take seats, I should be ready for you in just a moment. Thank you. Your Honor, I apologize for this interruption. If it pleases Your Honor, I'd like to have the court stenographer, Ms. Duval, read back the last question and answer of the testimony.
Very well.
Flint, where was it placed? Sweeney, it was propped up on a table.
Ah, yes, thank you, Ms. Duval. Officer Sweeney, a moment ago you said that you had found a letter.
Yes, sir, in the living room.
Thank you. Officer Sweeney, is that the letter that you found?
Yes, sir, it is.
Would you please read it to the jury?
Me?
Yes, please.
If any future historian wants to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say that I found two valuable things on this earth: my power in the world and Karen Andre. To those who can use it, the advice is worth what it has cost mankind. John Faulkner.
Thank you, Officer Sweeney. Submitted in evidence, Your Honor.
Accepted as Exhibit A.
Officer Sweeney, was the letter the only thing that you found in the apartment?
I know, sir. Out on the roof garden, I found a gun.
Officer Sweeney, I will now show you a rather unusual looking .32 caliber revolver. Is that the weapon that you found?
Yes, sir. Very same.
Thank you, officer. Submitted in evidence, Your Honor.
Accepted as Exhibit B.
Thank you. Officer Sweeney, where did you find the gun?
Well, it was lying under one of those fancy lawn chairs. I picked up the gun with my handkerchief, not to disturb any fingerprints. The barrel smelled strongly of powder, which shows that it had recently been fired.
I see. And tell us, did you ask Miss Andre whose gun it was?
Yes, sir, I did. She said it was hers.
And how did she explain the shot?
Well, she said Mr. Faulkner had been unhappy, and that he wrote the letter and left it in the living room and ordered her not to touch it. Well, then he went over to a drawer and he grabbed that gun. She saw what he was going to do with it and struggled with him. In the struggle, the gun went off and Mr. Faulkner was wounded in the chest.
So Miss Andre stated that the gun was in Mr. Faulkner's hand when it went off?
Yes, sir.
She was positive about that?
Yes, sir. Said it 3 times.
Officer Sweeney, was the gun examined for fingerprints?
Of course, at headquarters. Here's reports and photographs.
Thank you. And tell us, were the police able to identify the fingerprints on the gun?
Yes, sir. They were hers.
Whose, officer?
Karen Andre's.
Were there anyone else's fingerprints on the gun?
No, sir.
Submitted in evidence, Your Honor.
Accepted as Exhibits C and D.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Officer Sweeney, after the gun went off in Mr. Faulkner's hand, what happened next, according to Miss Andre?
Well, she said that Mr. Faulkner dropped the gun, and he yelled to her that she couldn't stop him. Well, then he jumped off the roof.
Did you question Miss Andre as to who else had been with them that night?
Yes, sir, I did. She said 2 gentlemen had. That they were friends of Mr. Faulkner's, and she had met him for the first time that night while eating dinner with Mr. Faulkner.
So Miss Andre claimed that she had never seen either of these 2 gentlemen before that night?
Yes, sir.
She was very emphatic about it?
Yes, sir. Couldn't shake her.
Thank you, Officer Sweeney. I have nothing further. Your witness, Counselor.
Thank you. Officer Sweeney, Miss Andre told you that she had to struggle with Mr. Faulkner in order to prevent his suicide. Did you notice any evidence of a struggle in her clothing?
Why, yes, ma'am, I did. Her dress was torn. It had diamond straps. Well, one of them was broken, so she had to hold up her dress with one hand. So I kind of felt a little embarrassed for her.
Thank you, that is all.
Your Honor, the people will next call Miss Jane Chandler.
Jane Chandler? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Jane Cecilia Chandler,
And what is your occupation?
handwriting expert for the New York Police Department.
Exhibit A, please. Thank you. Miss Chandler, do you recognize this letter?
Yes, I understand it is the letter found in Mr. Faulkner's penthouse the night of his death. I had been called upon to examine it.
Tell us, what were you asked to determine?
I was asked to determine if the letter was written by Mr. Faulkner.
And what is your verdict?
Certain peculiarities in the handwriting led me to the conclusion that this letter was forged.
Thank you, Miss Chandler. That is all.
Miss Chandler, it was called to your attention during the inquest that Miss Andre was in the habit of signing Mr. Faulkner's signature to unimportant documents at the time she was employed as his secretary. Now tell me, have you had the chance to compare these two signatures?
I have.
And what is your opinion of them?
I can compliment Miss Andre on her art. The difference is very slight.
Well, bearing that in mind, isn't it impossible to tell the difference between Mr. Faulkner's handwriting and Miss Andre's imitation?
No, Ms. Stevens, it's not impossible. We do have the means of determining the difference.
And what are the means, Miss Chandler?
Well, one is the microscope, which reveals certain vibrations and certain shadings of the pen according to the nerve condition of the writer, which cannot be imitated.
How often are you handwriting experts wrong in your decisions,
Your
Miss
Honor,
Chandler?
please, we object.
If Your Honor wishes, I wish to state this is a perfectly legitimate question, and this is not considered an exact science.
Your Honor, this has been accepted as an exact science by all of the courts for many years, and if Miss Stevens is simply trying...
Order. I will sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Chandler, in view of the similarity of their handwriting, isn't there a reasonable doubt that this letter was a forgery?
Well, of course, there can be a doubt, but
Thank you. That is all.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the people would like to call to the stand Nancy Lee Whitfield Faulkner.
Nancy Lee Faulkner? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Nancy Lee Whitfield Faulkner.
Were you related to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
When did you first meet Bjorn Faulkner?
In August of last year,
And where did you meet him?
at a party given by my friend Sandra Winston in Newport.
Mrs. Faulkner, you've no doubt heard about Bjorn Faulkner's reputation as being the most ruthless of men. Tell us, did you find him so on your first meeting?
Not at all. He was perfectly charming and considerate that first night I met him. I remember when Sandra introduced us, she said, "Here's a tough one for you, Nancy. I wonder whether you'll add him to your collection." Sandra always insisted on exaggerating my popularity. We danced that night. We danced in the garden under the trees, and we stopped on the edge of a pool. Bjorn reached up to pick a rose for me. I think we both felt a silent understanding that
Mrs. Faulkner? When did you see Bjorn Faulkner next?
About 3 days later, I invited him to dine at my home on Long Island. It was a real Swedish meal. I cooked it myself.
Did you see each other often after that?
Yes, quite often. Well, his visits became more and more frequent until the day that...
Until the day?
The day that he proposed to me.
I see. Please, continue.
We went driving, Bjorn and I alone. And we stopped on a lonely little road. I'm sorry.
so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you wish to be excused...
Your Honor, we object. This is a ploy staged to gain the sympathy of the jury.
I object to that remark.
With all due respect, Mr. Flint, I wish to state I demand a fair trial for my client.
Demand what you like, Miss Stevens. There will be no interference with my witnesses.
The jury will ignore these remarks.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You all right? Can you continue?
Please continue, Mrs. Faulkner.
It was then that Bjorn told me the truth about his fortune, that it was gone. He told me he couldn't ask me to marry him because he had nothing to offer me. But I loved him. I told him his money meant nothing to me.
Tell us, did Bjorn Faulkner feel hopeless about his future?
Not at all. He told me that my faith in him and my courage helped him so much. Well, I told him it was our duty to save his enterprises, our duty to the people he had wronged, not to ourselves. I made him realize his past mistakes, and he was ready to atone for them. We were starting a whole new life together. How could he think of suicide?
Did you remain in New York after your marriage?
Yes, we made our home in my Long Island estate. Bjorn gave up his New York penthouse.
Tell us, what did Mr. Faulkner tell you about Miss Andre?
Nothing then. But 2 weeks later, he came to me and said, "Dear, I feel that I must tell you about the secretary who has served me so long." I told him he didn't have to say anything if he didn't want to. He said he must. Our marriage had become a sacred trust, and the past could have no part in it. Then he said, "Karen Andre is the cause of my darkest years. I'm going to dismiss her."
And how did you respond to that?
Well, I said we must not be cruel. Perhaps we could find another position for Miss Andre. He said that he would provide for her financially, but that he never wanted to see her again.
Mrs. Faulkner, tell us, what did Bjorn Faulkner do on the day of January 16th?
He spent it in town on business as usual. He came home late in the afternoon and said that he had to have dinner with 3 friends that night. It was a business meeting, so he didn't have dinner at home.
Who were these 3 friends?
Well, he didn't tell me and I didn't ask. I made it a point never to interfere in his business.
I see. Can you tell us, did you notice anything peculiar in the way that he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not a thing. He kissed me goodbye and said that he would try to be home early. I followed him to the door and watched him drive away. I stood there for a few minutes thinking how happy we were. What a perfect dream our love was. A beautiful and uplifting relationship based on mutual trust. How did I know that her jealousy would bring about his death?
Objection. Move that be stricken from the records.
The witness's last sentence will be stricken from the record.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mrs. Faulkner. That is all.
Will you be able to answer a few more questions now, Mrs. Faulkner?
As many as you wish, Miss Stevens.
You stated that your marriage to Mr. Faulkner was a perfect dream.
Yes.
A beautiful, uplifting relationship based on mutual trust.
Yes.
Then why did you hire a detective to spy on your husband?
Well, I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect Bjorn.
Protect Mr. Faulkner? Would you please explain that?
Well, you see, some time ago, Bjorn had been threatened by a gangster, Larry Regan. He didn't pay any attention to it, but I was worried. So I hired Mr. Van Fleet to watch him. I did it secretly because I knew Bjorn would object.
How could a detective, following at a distance, protect Mr. Faulkner?
Well, I didn't think the underworld would dare attack a man who was constantly watched.
Watched? So all Mr. Van Fleet had to do was watch Mr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone?
Yes?
Not Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre.
Miss Stevens, that is insulting to me.
Oh, I haven't noticed you sparing any insults, Mrs. Faulkner.
I assure you, Miss Stevens, I intended no such thing.
You also stated that Mr. Faulkner said he never wanted to see Miss Andre again.
Yes?
And yet, after your marriage, he gave her his luxurious penthouse and was seen calling on her often and at night. Your detective told you that, didn't he, Mrs. Faulkner?
Yes, I knew it.
And how do you explain it, Mrs. Faulkner?
Well, I can't explain it. How do I know what blackmail she was holding over his head?
How do you explain the fact that Mr. Faulkner lied to you about dining with 3 gentlemen on the night of January 16th and instead went directly to Miss Andre's apartment?
If I could explain that, Miss Stevens, I might be able to save you the bother of this trial. We would have an explanation of my husband's death. All I know is that she had made him come to her home for some reason which he could not tell me, and that he was found dead that very night.
Mrs. Faulkner, I would like you to answer one more question now.
Yes?
I would like you to state here, under oath, that Bjorn Faulkner loved you.
Bjorn Faulkner was mine.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Faulkner. That is all.
No, that is not all. Ask her one more question. Ask her whether she loved him.
I did, Miss Andre.
Then how can you speak of him as you did? How can you sit there and lie to him that he cannot come back to defend
I've been
himself?
questioned by my husband's murderer.
That's all, Your Honor.
She's lying. She's lying. I know you're upset.
Karen.
One of us is lying, and we both know which one.
Oh, your client.
Court is now adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
All rise.
Smart handful.
Nice surprise. Bye, Lauren.
You may be seated.
All rise. Superior Court of the State of New York, number 11. The Honorable Judge Margaret Heath presiding.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
The people are ready, Your Honor.
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the people call as their first witness today, Magda Svensson.
Magda Svensson? What is your name?
You know it. You just called me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. Would you please state your name?
Magda Svensson.
Tell us, what country did you come from?
A Swede never come from any country but Sweden.
What is your occupation?
I been housekeeper.
And by whom were you employed last?
By Mr. Björn Faulkner, and before that by his father.
How long were you employed by them?
I been in the family 30 years. I remember Björn when he was just a little boy.
When did you come to America?
I been here 5 years.
And what were the duties that Mr. Faulkner assigned to you?
I keep penthouse for him. I stay even after he go. Then he gets married and give penthouse to her. But I never employed by this one.
Now, Mrs. Svensson, what can you...
Miss Svensson?
I beg your pardon. Miss Svensson.
That's all right.
What can you tell us about Mr. Faulkner's connections to Miss Andre?
Oh, decent woman like me shouldn't know such things. But sin is shameless in this world.
Please, tell us about it.
From very first day this woman come, she was sleeping with him. She tried to get her claws tight on Mr. Faulkner. It is not good thing when secretary forgets to secretary.
You mean she was in love with Mr. Faulkner?
Only the heart can love. She have no heart. No, she want to know too much about Mr. Faulkner's business.
I see. Was Mr. Faulkner in love with her?
He married the other woman. A good man never loves double.
Then why did Mr. Faulkner insist on keeping her?
Before he know it, she learned so much about his business he cannot let her go. Then she knows she got her claws tight on him. She make him spend much money on her. You try to count up all the money he wasted on that woman.
I see. Miss Svensson, can you give us any instances of this extravagance?
Oh, I can so. He had platinum gown made for her. Yes, I said platinum. Fine mesh, fine and soft as silk. And she wore it on her naked body. He would make fire in fireplace and heat the dress. Then he would put it on her, as hot as she could stand. And if it burned her shameless skin, she laughed like the pagan she is. And he would kiss the burn, wild like tiger.
Objection!
Your Honor, these are the facts pertaining to vital questions.
But, Your Honor,
Silence. I shall ask the witness to word her testimony more modestly.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sin is sin, Judge, any name you call it.
Miss Svensson, can you tell us, how did Mr. Faulkner act at the time of his marriage to Miss Whitfield?
Oh, he was happy. For first time in his life. Happy, like decent man, but found right road.
Did you know of anything that could make him worry in those days that might have eventually brought him to suicide?
No, nothing.
Now tell us, how did Miss Andre react to the other woman?
She was silent, like stone statue. But I see her crying one time after wedding. Crying, sobbing, I think for the first time in her life.
Why was she crying?
I don't know. All women cry sometime, just to cry.
Was she crying because she had lost Faulkner?
No, not her. She lose one man, she find another. I seen her kissing another man on night of wedding.
Really? What man?
I not know him. I seen him first time night of wedding.
I see. Please, tell us about that.
I had gone to wedding. It was beautiful. Beautiful, excuse me. My Björn so handsome, and the bride all in white and lovely as lily. I cry like looking at my own children. I'm sorry. But she not go to wedding.
Did Miss Andre stay at home?
She stay home. I come back from wedding early. I come in servant's door, she not here. She was home all right, but she was not alone.
Who was with her?
He was, the man. Out on the roof in the garden, I see them. It was dark, but I see them. He held her close, like he would crush her. Then he kissed her, longer than a man has a right to. The sinner.
And then?
She step aside and say something. I not hear. She speak very soft. He not say word.
He just take her hand and hold it, and kiss it, and kiss it, and hold it. So long, I get tired waiting, go back to my room.
I see. Miss Svensson, did you see this man leave?
No, I did not.
Have you seen this man again?
Yes, once.
And when was that?
On the night of January 16th.
I see. Could you please tell us about that?
Well, she was very strange that day. She called me and say I have rest of day off, and I been suspicious.
Why did that make you suspicious?
It was Wednesday, and my day off is Thursday, and I not ask for second day. So I say I not need day off. But she say she not need me, so I go.
What time was it that you left?
About 4 o'clock. But I want to know secret. I come back.
And tell us, what time did you come back?
You make a funny on me?
Just a minor jest, Miss Svensson, please.
I come back about 10 at night. The house dark, she not home, so I wait. Half hour after, I hear them come. But I seen Mr. Faulkner with her, so I afraid to stay. But before I go, I seen 2 gentlemen with them. And one man, oh, he was drunk.
Who was that man?
I not know him.
How about the other man?
The other one?
Yes.
He was same man I saw kissing Miss Andre on night of wedding.
I see. Thank you, Miss Svensson. That is all.
Oh, just a minute. You still need to talk with me for a while.
For what? I tell all I know.
Well, you may know the answers to a few more questions. For instance, you stated that you had seen the stranger kissing Miss Andre.
Yes, I did so.
But you also stated that you could not hear what was said. Now remember, you are under oath. If you couldn't hear what was said, you can't really swear he made love to her, can you?
No, but I can't swear that he didn't either.
Can you really swear you saw him kiss her?
With my own 2 eyes, I saw the sinner do it.
Well, after all, Miss Svensson, what is so sinful about a man kissing a woman?
Listen, young woman, maybe you don't know. Maybe you are too young to be experienced. But I know that a kiss is last store in heaven before a girl falls into the blistering depths of everlasting hell.
Please, Miss Svensson, let's confine ourselves to this case. Now, you said it was dark when you saw the stranger for the first time.
Yes, it was dark.
And on the night of January 16th, when you were so innocently spying on your mistress, you saw her come in with Mr. Faulkner, and you hurried away quickly in order not to be caught. Am I correct?
You have good memory.
You just got a swift glance at the 2 gentlemen with them.
Yes.
Would you please tell us what the drunken gentleman looked like?
How can I? No time to notice face and too dark a door.
So, Miss Svensson, you're telling us that you're able to identify the other man, but you cannot identify the drunken gentleman? You've only seen the other man once before.
Let me tell you, young woman, I am under oath, as you say, and I am God-fearing woman and respect oath. I said it was same man, and I say it again. What do you think? I know nothing about men?
That is all, Miss Svensson. Thank you very much.
Your Honor, the people next call, Mr. John Graham Whitfield.
John Graham Whitfield? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
John Graham Whitfield.
And what is your business, sir?
I'm president of the Whitfield National Bank.
Mr. Whitfield, were you related to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his father-in-law.
I see. Mr. Whitfield, it is obvious to all that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. Could you tell us, please, about the state of Bjorn Faulkner's financial affairs immediately preceding his death?
I'd have to say it was desperate, but not hopeless. My bank made a loan of $250 million to Mr. Faulkner in an effort to save his enterprises. Needless to say, that money is lost.
I see. Mr. Whitfield, what prompted you to make that loan?
He was the husband of my only daughter. Her happiness has always been of paramount importance to me, but my motives were not entirely personal. Realizing the countless tragedies of small investors that a crash would bring, I felt it my duty to make every possible effort to prevent it.
I see. Is it possible that you would have risked such a considerable sum of money in Bjorn Faulkner's enterprises had you believed them hopelessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. It was a difficult undertaking, but I felt that the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
He therefore had no reason to commit suicide as far as his business affairs were concerned.
He had every reason for remaining alive.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us, was Bjorn Faulkner happy in his family life, in his relations with your daughter?
Mr. Flint, you can believe me when I tell you that my daughter had found perfect happiness with Faulkner.
Mr. Whitfield, what can you tell us about Bjorn Faulkner personally?
I must admit that Mr. Faulkner had many qualities of which I could not approve. We were as different as two people could be. Above all, I believed in one's duty to others. Bjorn Faulkner believed in nothing but himself.
Mr. Whitfield, based upon your knowledge of Bjorn Faulkner, would you have believed it possible that he would have committed suicide?
I consider it absolutely impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That is all. Your witness, counsel.
Thank you. Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
Yes.
And you never lost your temper? You never disagreed with him in a quarrel?
Miss Stevens, I don't lose my temper.
Oh. Well, if my memory serves me right, there was some trouble when you made that stupendous loan to Mr. Faulkner.
Purely a misunderstanding, I assure you.
Oh, really?
I must admit that Mr. Faulkner made a somewhat unethical attempt to speed up that loan, which was quite unnecessary since I granted it gladly, for my daughter's sake.
You stated, Mr. Whitfield, that your fortune had been badly damaged by the Faulkner crash.
Yes.
And at present, your financial situation is rather strained.
Yes.
Then tell us, how could you afford to offer a $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Lawrence Regan?
Your Honor, what has this got to do
Your
with
Honor,
this case?
I would like the privilege of explaining this.
Very well.
I did offer such a reward. The gentleman commonly known as Larry Regan is a notorious criminal who specializes in extorting money for so-called protection. He not only menaced Mr. Faulkner, but he threatened to kidnap my daughter. I offered that reward for evidence that would lead to his arrest and conviction.
Mr. Whitfield, why did you and your daughter disappear so suddenly after the night of January 16th?
Miss Stevens, I think the answer to that is obvious. My daughter was crushed by the sudden death of her husband. I felt it necessary to take her away for her health.
You love your daughter very much.
Yes.
And you've always made it a point that her every wish be granted.
I can proudly say yes.
When she or you desire anything, you don't stop at the price, do you?
Well, we've
Then
never
would you refuse to buy her the man she wanted?
Miss Stevens.
You wouldn't stop even if it took your entire fortune to break the first unbreakable man you've ever met.
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, perhaps you're going to tell us here today that your money had nothing to do with Mr. Faulkner dismissing Miss Andre, and that no ultimatum was given to him.
You're absolutely wrong. My daughter was not the least bit jealous of Miss Andre.
Oh, I'd be careful of statements like that, Mr. Whitfield. Please keep in mind that your daughter was elevated to the high state of matrimony by purchase.
Who the hell do you think you are? I could crush you like a paper cup.
Well, thank you, Mr. Whitfield. You see, that's exactly what I wanted to prove.
Your Honor, we move the defense counsel's outrageous remarks that led to this outburst be stricken from the record.
The remarks will be stricken from the record.
Your Honor, the people rest.
Move that the case be dismissed for lack of evidence.
Denied.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot begin to pass judgment on Karen Andre without first passing it on Bjorn Faulkner. You see, he had put himself outside all human standards, and whether it was below or above him is for each of you to decide personally. But throughout the rest of the trial, I will ask you to keep a few things in mind. For one thing, Bjorn Faulkner was the man who said that he needed no reasons for his actions. He was the reason. He was also the man who stated that the laws were made for the weak and that the strong were the laws. If you keep these two things in mind throughout the rest of the trial, you will begin to understand that the financial situation that Bjorn Faulkner was thrown into during his last few months of life was so intolerable to him that he would resort to the most desperate means of escape, including suicide. And that is what the defense will prove here today. Your Honor, our first witness will be Miss Ingrid Ljungqvist.
Ingrid Ljungqvist? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name.
Ingrid Ljungqvist.
And what was your last position?
My last job was secretary to Mr. Bjorn Faulkner.
And how long did you hold that job?
Since beginning of November, since Miss Andre left.
And what was your position before that?
Bookkeeper for Mr. Faulkner.
And how long did you hold that position?
5 years.
Did Mr. Faulkner give you Miss Andre's position when she was dismissed?
Yes.
And did Miss Andre instruct you in your new duties?
Yes, she did.
How was her behavior at the time? Was she angry or resentful?
No, she was very calm, like always, and explained everything clear.
Did you ever witness any trouble between Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre?
Mrs. Lawyer, there was as much trouble between Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre as between you and your shadow.
What about Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Whitfield? Were you ever present at any of their business conferences?
I never been present at conferences, but I see Mr. Whitfield come to our office many times. Mr. Whitfield, he not like Mr. Faulkner.
Excuse me, please. Yes. Did you get a name on this?
No, it just got it right. Just right down.
Is this the time right here? Your Honor, I would like to report this incident which I consider a hoax. A man has just phoned and asked to speak to me immediately. When told that it was impossible, he gave the following message. Do not put Karen Andre on the stand until I get there. No signature.
I want to go on the stand right away.
Oh, may I ask why, Miss Andre?
Question me, Miss Stevens.
Miss Andre, we need to finish with the examination of Miss Ljungqvist first.
What's your hurry, Miss Andre? Who are you
Silence.
expecting?
I shall ask the defendant to refrain from further interruptions.
Your Honor, this ruling should apply to the district attorney.
Order another outbreak of this kind, and I will find the defense counsel in contempt of court. Now proceed with the examination, Miss Stevens.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Miss Ljungqvist, before the interruption, you stated that Mr. Whitfield did not like Mr. Faulkner. What made you state that?
I heard what he said one day. Mr. Faulkner was desperate for money, and Mr. Whitfield asked him sarcastic what he was going to do if his business crashed. Mr. Faulkner shrugged and said, "Oh, commit suicide." Mr. Whitfield looked at him very strange and said very slow, "If you do, be sure you make a good job of it."
Thank you. That is all. Your witness, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Miss Stevens. Miss Ljungqvist, where were you working before you started your job with Mr. Faulkner?
I worked for a bank in Stockholm.
I see. But you were not working there immediately preceding your time with Mr. Faulkner.
No,
Where were you at that time?
I was in prison.
I'm sorry, Miss Ljungqvist, I couldn't quite hear you.
I was in prison.
I see. So, you were in jail. On what charge?
Embezzlement.
From your employer?
Yes.
The truth of the matter is that you absconded from your bank with 300,000 kroner, didn't you?
Yes, I did. But Mr. Faulkner helped me to get out of prison. He gave me a chance to go straight.
Oh, Faulkner did. He helped you to go straight so that you could help him go crooked. Sorry, Your Honor. Miss Ljungqvist, you said that you had been employed by Mr. Faulkner for 5 years?
Yes.
Tell us, did you know all that time that he was crooked?
No, I did not.
Did you know all that time he was a swindler?
No, I did not know that.
And you didn't know what all of those brilliant financial operations of his were, eh?
I knew that Björn Faulkner could do what other people could not, but I know it was not wrong.
Really? How did you know that?
Because he was Mr. Björn Faulkner.
Ah, I see. And the king could do no wrong.
Mr. Lawyer, when people like you and me meet a man like Björn Faulkner, we bow and we take orders, but we do not ask questions.
Splendid. Splendid, my dear Miss Ljungqvist. Your devotion to your master is quite worthy of admiration. You would do just about anything for him, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Tell us, did your devotion also run as highly for Miss Andre as well?
Miss Andre served Mr. Faulkner.
I see. Then such a small matter as a few lies for your master's sake would mean nothing to you.
I have not lied, Mr. Lawyer. Mr. Faulkner is dead and cannot tell me to lie. But if I had choice, I would lie for Björn Faulkner rather than tell truth for you.
For which statement, Miss Ljungqvist, I am more grateful to you than I can possibly express. Thank you. That is all. For now.
The defense would like to call Karen Andre to the stand, please.
Karen Andre? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
That's useless. I'm an atheist.
The witness has to affirm regardless.
I affirm.
What is your name?
Karen Andre.
And what was your last position?
Secretary to Björn Faulkner.
Tell us about your first meeting with Mr. Faulkner.
I met him for the first time in his office in Stockholm. He was alone. I came in an answer to his advertisement for a stenographer. It was my first job, and that was his first office.
How did Mr. Faulkner greet you that day?
He got up and didn't say a word, just stood and stared at me.
Did he hire you that day?
He said that I was too young and he didn't like me, but he threw a stenographer's pad at me and said, "Get down to work, I'm in a hurry," and I did.
And you worked all day?
Yes, all day. He dictated as fast, almost faster than he could talk. He didn't give me time to say a word. He disliked everything I did. He didn't smile once and never took his eyes off me.
What happened when you finished?
When I finished, I told him I was quitting. I put my coat on and started out. He looked at me and did not answer. Then he tapped on his desk once. I stopped. After a moment, he said quietly, "Tomorrow at 9 here." I went out without a word. That night, I could not sleep. His eyes were always on me. The next morning, I was in his office at 9.
And you and Mr. Faulkner worked and planned and you rose to success together.
Yes, we did.
Please tell us the extent of Mr. Faulkner's personal fortune at the height of his success.
He had no personal fortune. He always said that the world belonged to those who could use it. So he took what he wanted. In business, when he owed money to one of his companies, it was crossed off the books and charged to the accounts of several other companies. That's how he balanced his books. It was very simple.
Why did a man of Mr. Faulkner's genius resort to such methods?
He wanted to build an empire, and he wanted to build it fast.
And when did his business difficulties begin?
Over a year ago.
Tell us about it.
Well, all of his companies had begun to need money at about the same time, and we could no longer transfer a charge from one company to another without throwing the other into the bankruptcy, and thus showing the weakness of our whole financial position.
So what did you do?
A $250 million loan was necessary.
Bjorn tried to get it from the Whitfield Investment Corporation, but Mr. Whitfield refused it until his daughter came into the picture.
His daughter?
Yes.
How did that happen, Miss Andre?
Bjorn met her at a party, and she soon made it clear that she was greatly interested in him, and he kept up friendship for diplomatic reasons. Then, one day he came to me, and I have never seen him pale before. And he said, "Karen, we have only one piece of collateral left, and you are holding it. You'll have to let it borrow me for a while." And I said, "Certainly. What is it?" And he said that it was himself. And I knew that it was for Nancy Lee Whitfield. It wasn't so easy to answer, but finally I said, "All right, Bjorn."
Had Mr. Faulkner proposed to Miss Whitfield?
No, she proposed to him.
And how do you know that?
He told me. She took him for a drive, then stopped on the lonely road and turned to him point blank and said, "What's the use of pretending? I want you, and you know it. You don't want me, and I know that, but I have the price." And he said, "What is the price?" And she said, "A certain 250 million you'll need to save your business."
Silence! Please. Anyone disturbing these proceedings will be asked to leave the courtroom.
Thank you, Your Honor. What was Mr. Faulkner's answer to that, Miss Andre?
He said, "It's costing you an awful lot of money." And she said, "Money has never meant anything to me." Then he said, "Will you always remember that it is just a business deal?" And she said, "You'll have the money. I'll have you." Such was the bargain.
What about Mr. Whitfield? Was he eager to accept this bargain?
Bjorn said that he thought that Mr. Whitfield would have a stroke. But Miss Whitfield insisted she always had her way.
In other words, Miss Andre, Mr. Faulkner sold himself as his last security.
Yes.
And did you resent that marriage?
No. We always faced our business as war. And when any war reaches a crisis, someone had to be sacrificed. The time for my sacrifice had come, but it was harder for him than for me.
Then why did Mr. Faulkner dismiss you 2 weeks after his marriage?
He was forced to do that. Mr. Whitfield refused to advance the money until I was gone.
And what reason did he offer?
It was Miss Whitfield's ultimatum. I had to be fired.
After you were fired, did Mr. Whitfield grant the loan?
No. Bjorn took it.
How?
By forging Mr. Whitfield's signatures on 250 million worth of securities.
And how do you know that?
I helped him to do it.
Did this $250 million help Mr. Faulkner?
Only temporarily. Bjorn had stretched the credit to the limit, and there was no more to be had.
And how did he take this situation?
He knew that that was the end.
What were his plans?
You don't find men like Bjorn Faulkner cringing before a bankruptcy commission. You don't find them locked in jail.
So the alternative?
He was not afraid of the world. He had defied its every law. He was going to live it when and how he pleased. He was...
Regan? It's Larry Regan. Is he here at your behalf?
What is the meaning of
Larry, you
this?
promised to stay away.
What is the meaning of this?
Your Honor, I demand this man not to be allowed to testify.
Oh, and why not, Miss Andre?
Don't answer, Miss
Silence!
Andre. Don't
Order!
answer.
That's the man I see kiss him. That's the man.
Admit him.
Your Honor, this man loves me. He will do anything to protect me. Please don't believe a word he says.
Karen, your sacrifice is useless.
What do you mean?
Faulkner is dead.
Dad?
You didn't know it?
No, she didn't know. When she was arrested for Faulkner's murder, he was still alive.
He is alive.
What are they talking about?
I don't know.
What's going on?
He's alive. He's waiting for me. You're lying to me. Not Bjorn, not Bjorn. He's waiting for me. I won't believe it. I don't believe it. No.
Oh, my God.
Karen.
Hey,
Cohen.
Take
Get
her
her out of
outside.
here. Get her
Take
out,
her out
get
the
her out.
side.
Court is now adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
All rise. All rise. Superior Court number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Margaret Heaton presiding. The rest of you may be seated.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
The defense is ready, Your Honor.
The prosecution wishes to inform you, Your Honor, that we have issued a warrant for the arrest of one Lawrence Regan. He was last seen in the company of the defense counsel after yesterday's proceedings, and we would like to inform you that until we find him, we would like to...
Keep your shirt on. You suppose I'm here for? To give you district attorneys a thrill? She's guilty, I'm guilty, I'll stay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Defense may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would like to call to the stand Karen Andre. Miss Andre, when you came to court yesterday, did you know the whole truth about this case?
No.
In view of the certain circumstances which have arisen, do you wish to change any of your testimony?
No.
When you came here yesterday to testify, did you plan on protecting anyone?
Yes.
Whom?
Bjorn Faulkner.
Do you still find it necessary to protect him?
No, it is not necessary anymore.
Miss Andre, do you still claim that Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
No. Bjorn Faulkner did not commit a suicide. He was murdered. I didn't kill him. Please believe me. Not for my sake. I don't care what you do to me now. But you cannot let his murderer remain unpunished. I'll tell you the whole truth. I lied at the inquest. I lied to my own attorney. I was going to lie here,
But everything I told you so far has been true. Now, I'll tell you the rest.
When the court adjourned yesterday, you were about to tell us about Mr. Faulkner's way out of his difficulties.
I told you that he was going to leave the world when and how he pleased, but I didn't mean that he was to kill himself. I did push man's body off the penthouse, but that body was dead before I touched it. It was not Bjorn Faulkner.
Please explain this to us, Miss Andre.
Bjorn wanted to be reported as dead, but he didn't want any searches or investigations afterwards. So he decided to stage a suicide and then disappear. I was to go with him. He had a plan in mind for a long time. He kept 100 million from the Whitfield loan for the purpose. But we needed someone who could help us. Someone who could not be connected with Bjorn in any way. And there was only one such person we knew. Larry Regan.
What made you believe that Mr. Regan would help you in so dangerous an undertaking?
He loved me.
And he agreed to help you in spite of that?
He agreed because of that.
What was the plan, Miss Andre?
Regan was to get a corpse. On that night of January 16th, Lefty O'Toole, gunman, was shot by rival gangsters. Regan stole his body. O'Toole's height, measurements, hair, and even a blood type were the same as Bjorn's. He was the man I pushed off the penthouse.
Was that the extent of Mr. Regan's help?
No. Regan used to be a transport pilot, and he was to get a plane to take Bjorn to South America. That day, January 16th, Bjorn had transferred 100 million to 3 banks in Buenos Aires under the name of Ronald Haddon. A month later, I was to meet him at the Hotel Continental. Until then, the 3 of us were not to communicate with each other, and no matter what happened, we were not to reveal the secret.
Miss Andre, what happened on the night of January 16th?
Bjorn came to my house that night. He was smiling. He loved the danger. We had dinner together. Then we went to Regan's place. He had O'Toole's body dressed in traveling clothes, gray overcoat and hat. The 3 of us drove back to my house with the body. Bjorn wanted to be seen entering the building, so I didn't use my key. I rang the bell. The 3 of us were dressed formally to make it look like a party. Bjorn and Regan supported the body as if it was a drunken friend. The night concierge opened the door, and we went up in the elevator.
And then what happened?
Bjorn exchanged clothes with the body. He wrote the letter and propped it up on the center table where anyone could find it. The 3 of us had a drink. They carried the body out in the garden and left it leaning against the balcony. Then we said goodbye. Bjorn was to go first. He went down an elevator. I stood and watched, the needle of the indicator moving all 50 floors down. Then it stopped. He was gone.
And then what happened?
Regan followed him a few minutes later. They were to meet 20 miles out of the city where Regan had left the plane. I stayed alone for an hour. The penthouse was silent. I didn't want to wait out in the garden with the body. I lay on the bed in my room. There was a clock by the bed, and it ticked in the darkness. I waited. When an hour had passed, I knew the plane had taken off. Bjorn and Regan were on their way to South America. I got up. I tore my dress to make it look like a struggle. I went out in the garden and looked down. The world seemed so far away. I took my gun and fired a shot into the air. To explain a gun wound in a tool's body if it's discovered. I must have been nervous. I forgot all about the fingerprints. I dropped the gun and pushed the body over. I thought all of Bjorn's troubles went with it, but I didn't know that his life went too.
That's all, Your Honor. You're a witness, Mr. Flint.
Thank you, Miss Stevens. Miss Andre, you said that you lied at the inquest,
Yes,
and you also said that you lied to your attorney.
yes.
And the story that you've just told us here is completely different from the one that you came to court prepared to tell.
It is.
Then why should we believe a word of it? How are we to know when you were lying and when you were telling the truth?
Objection.
Objection sustained.
Thank you.
Now then, Miss Andre, didn't Bjorn Faulkner have a clear conception of the difference between right and wrong?
Bjorn never thought of things as right or wrong. To him, it was only you could or you couldn't. He always could.
I see. And yourself? Didn't you object to helping him in all of his swindles?
To me, it was only he wants or he doesn't.
You loved Bjorn Faulkner?
Yes,
Such as he was?
because he was such as he was.
Exactly, Miss Andre. Now, what would you do if someone were to take away from you this man that you loved so insanely? If she were to take the ruthless brute that you loved and turn him into her own ideal of an upright man, would you still love him?
Objection.
Sustained.
I want to
Thank you.
answer. I want the district attorney to know that he's insulting Bjorn Faulkner's memory.
You do. But you thought nothing of insulting him while he was still alive by dividing your love with a common criminal.
You lousy son of a bitch!
Don't
You're
let
down!
me.
You're a ditch!
Please don't let me. You are mistaken, Mr. Flint.
It's all right.
Regan loved me. I didn't love him.
And he didn't demand your love for his help?
He demanded nothing.
You didn't ask him to help you take revenge on your first lover?
No.
Why so particular, Miss Andre? Is there really so much of a difference between a swindler and a gangster?
Objection.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Miss Andre, you stated that you were the only one who had full knowledge of all of Mr. Faulkner's swindling activities.
Yes,
You had enough information to send him to jail at
I
any
never
time.
do that.
But you could if you wanted to.
I suppose so.
Well, isn't that the explanation for Mr. Faulkner's repeated visits to you after his marriage? Bjorn Faulkner had reformed. He wanted to avoid a crash, but you held it over his head. You could expose him and ruin him before he'd had a chance to make good for his crimes. What was it that held him in your hands, Miss Andre? Was it love or fear?
Bjorn never knew the meaning of the word fear.
I see. Tell us, Miss Andre, who knew about the transfer of the $100 million to Buenos Aires?
Bjorn, myself, and Regan.
Not just yourself and Mr. Regan alone? With your knowledge of Mr. Faulkner's business activities and your ability to forge his signature, could not you and Mr. Regan here have sent that money to South America yourselves?
It would not be necessary. Bjorn would give me the money if I asked for it.
So Bjorn Faulkner kept you in extravagant luxury?
Yes.
And you hated to change your mode of living. You hated to see him turn his fortune over to his investors, to see him poor.
No one was ever to see him poor.
Oh, no, of course not. Because you and your gangster lover were going to murder him and get the $100 million that no one knew about.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Miss Andre, you've heard it testified that Mr. Faulkner's marriage to Miss Whitfield had brought him the first real happiness that he'd ever known. And you hated him for that, didn't you?
You don't understand Bjorn Faulkner.
Perhaps not. Perhaps you're right. Maybe I didn't understand Bjorn Faulkner. But let's just see if I understand you. First, you formed a partnership with a swindler virtually on the first day that you met him. With him, you defrauded thousands of investors the world over. Next, you cultivated a friendship with a known criminal. And then you admitted to us that you assisted in a $250 million forgery. This, you told us proudly, flaunting your defiance of all sense of honesty. And after all of that, you don't expect us to believe you capable of murder?
You are wrong, Mr. Flint. I would have been capable of murder, but only for Bjorn Faulkner.
That is all, Miss Andre.
Your Honor, the defense would like to call Lawrence Regan to the stand, please.
Lawrence Regan? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
What is your name?
Lawrence Regan.
What is your occupation, Mr. Regan?
I'm, unemployed.
How long have you known Miss Andre?
About 5 months.
And where did you meet her?
I met her at Faulkner's office. I went to do some business with him. I gave up the business when I met his secretary.
How did you happen to become friendly with Miss Andre?
The first meeting wasn't exactly friendly. She told me I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound, and I couldn't go in to see her boss. So I told her I'd think it over, and I left. Only I didn't think of the business. I thought of her. So the next day I got her a pound of orchids. Do you have any idea how many flowers it takes to make a pound of orchids? Not on your salary. Anyways, that's how it started.
Didn't you know that Miss Andre and Mr. Faulkner were having a relationship?
I knew it before I ever saw her, but what of it? I couldn't help myself.
You never expected her to share in your feelings?
No.
You never made any attempt to force them upon her?
Do you really have to know all that?
I'm afraid we do, Mr. Regan.
I kissed her by force. Once. It was the night of Faulkner's wedding. She was alone and so unhappy. And I was just crazy about her. We never mentioned it since.
When did Miss Andre first tell you of Mr. Faulkner's plans to escape to South America?
About 2 weeks before we pulled it.
And was Lefty O'Toole one of your men?
No.
Did you have any connection with his murder?
No, I'm, sorry about that.
Mr. Regan, you had no definite knowledge of his planned murder.
I, just had a way of guessing.
What happened on the night of January 16th?
It's all worked out as Miss Andre has told you, but she only knows half the story. I know the rest.
What happened after you left the penthouse that night?
I left about 10 minutes after Faulkner. He had taken my car to cover his identity. I had one of my men leave another car for me at the door.
And where did you go?
To Meadow Lane, about 20 miles out into Kings County. I'd left my plane there earlier in the evening. Faulkner was to get there first, then wait for me.
What time did you get there?
About midnight. There was a bright moon, I remember. I take a turn off the road, and I see tracks in the mud where Faulkner's car had passed. You know, when I pulled back out in the lane, I lost my mind because my plane was gone.
So what did you do?
I searched for that plane for 2 hours, but no luck.
And then what?
Well, I started looking around for other things.
Faulkner's car was there where we had agreed to leave it. Lights were off, keys were in the ignition. It was about then that I noticed some other tracks in the ground where the plane had taken off. Faulkner couldn't have flown that plane, though. He wasn't a pilot.
Did you find anything else there?
Yeah. Another car hidden in the brush.
What kind of a car?
A big black caddy.
Really? What did you do?
Well, I wanted to find out who owned it, so I sat in the back seat and waited.
How long did you have to wait?
The rest of that night.
And then?
Then the owner came back. He looked strange. His clothes were a mess.
So what did you do?
Well, I pretended I was asleep in the back seat. When he opened the door, I thought he was gonna have a heart attack.
Really? Then what?
Well, he opened up the door and I said, "Oh, it's you." He asked me who I was. I said, "The name's Ice Regan. Perhaps you've heard of it. I was in a little trouble and had to hide out for a while. Finding your car here was quite a convenience." He told me it was too bad and to get the hell out.
And did you get out?
No. I says, "What's the hurry?" He told me it was none of my business. I said, "What if I was to make it my business?"
What did he say?
Nothing. He looks at me, so I look at him. Then he pulls out his checkbook and says, "Would $25,000 be enough?" I said, "He'll do. Lawrence Regan's the name." Then he wrote out the check.
Mr. Regan, I would like you to tell me if this is the check that you are referring to.
Yeah, that's it.
Your Honor, we offer this check in evidence.
What is all of this nonsense? Who wrote that check?
Who wrote the check, Mr. Regan?
I believe the clerk of the court is literate enough to read that check for you.
Well, Your Honor, it is highly unusual, but...
I don't see any harm in it. Proceed.
Paid to the order of Lawrence Regan, the sum of $25,000. Signed, John Graham Whitfield.
This is an outrage!
I demand to see that check.
Silence. Another outbreak of this kind, and I will have this courtroom cleared.
Your Honor, we offer this check as part of our evidence.
We object.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Accepted in evidence.
What happened after he gave you the check, Mr. Regan?
Well, I took the check and folded it very neatly. Then I put it in my pocket. And I thanked the man very much. Then I took out my gun and I said, "Listen here, you lousy bastard, what'd you do with Faulkner?"
Mr. Whitfield,
Silence.
Mr. Whitfield,
The
please.
witness is allowed to testify. If it is proved to be perjury, he will suffer the consequences.
What did he
Proceed,
answer?
Ms. Stevens.
Excuse me, what did he answer?
He says he didn't know what I was talking about. So I jammed my gun in him a little harder and I said, "Don't waste my time. What'd you do with them?" He told me if I killed him, I'd never find out.
Did you get any information out of him that evening?
Not a word. So I let him go. I always knew where I could find him. Besides, I didn't want to kill him. Yet.
After you let Mr. Whitfield go, did you try and find Mr. Faulkner?
I didn't lose a second. I took the next plane to South America. Put the word out on the streets. I even advertised in the papers, but no one called at the banks for the money.
During this time, did you try to communicate with Miss Andre at all?
No. We had agreed to stay away from each other for a month. And she had been arrested for Faulkner's murder. You know, I had a laugh when I read that one. But I couldn't say a word not to betray Faulkner if he was still alive. So I waited.
What were you waiting for?
The month to run out, February 16th. I checked into the Hotel Continental at Buenos Aires. Waited every minute of every hour that last day, but Faulkner never showed.
And then?
Then I knew he was dead. So I flew back to New York and started the search for my plane. We found it yesterday in a deserted valley in New Jersey about, 100 miles out from Kings County. I only recognized it because of the engine number. It had been landed, and fire had been set to it.
Was the plane empty, Mr. Regan?
No. Inside was the body of a man.
Could you identify him?
You know, that was pretty tough. It was pretty much a burnt skeleton. But, the build was the same. And I never forget a face. It was burnt. But it was Faulkner. I examined the body, or what was left of it. I found 2 bullet wounds in the bones. One in the right hand, another one in a rib over the heart. Just like Faulkner to put up a fight, you know. He must have been disarmed first, shot through the hand. And the murdered defenseless. Straight through the heart.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. Thank you very much. That is all, Your Honor.
Mr. Regan, just exactly what is your business?
I've denied that information to so many others. It would seem so partial if I told only you.
I see. I see. Then perhaps you can tell us, what do you do when prospective clients refuse to pay you protection?
I'm legally allowed not to understand what you're talking about.
I see. That's fine. You don't have to understand. May I question you as to whether you read the newspapers?
You may.
Well?
Question me.
Would you kindly state whether or not you read the newspapers?
Occasionally.
I see. Did you happen to read this one? That when a Mr. James Sutton Vance, Jr. refused to pay protection to a certain gangster, his magnificent country home in Westchester was completely destroyed by an explosion just after he and his guests had left, barely missing a wholesale slaughter. Was that, Mr. Regan, a coincidence?
A remarkable coincidence, Mr. Flint. Just after the guests left. Do you often throw parties of your own?
Did you further read, Mr. Regan, that when a Mr. Daniel J. Keith
Your
refused...
Honor, we object. Such questions are irrelevant to this case.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Regan, you had no ill feelings towards Mr. Faulkner for the failure of your business dealings with him?
No.
Now then, Lawrence Ice Regan, tell us, what would you do if someone were to take this woman that you love so much and throw her aside, merely because he'd found someone else with more money?
I'd cut his throat with a dull saw.
You would?
I would.
Then tell us, and yet, you expect us to believe that you would step aside with a grand gesture and throw this same woman back into the arms of another man.
Objection.
I loved her.
You did. Then tell us, why did you allow Faulkner to continue to see her after his marriage?
Just a rare privilege.
You, too, didn't hold a blackmail plot over his head?
Oh, do you have any proof of that?
Her association with you, Mr. Regan, is the best.
Objection.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Mr. Regan, how did you kill Bjorn Faulkner?
Objection, Your Honor. This
All
is
right,
sustained.
Counselor. All right. Mr. Regan, you deny having anything to do with Bjorn Faulkner's murder.
I do.
You deny you were an accomplice to that murder.
I do.
And yet, you admit knowledge of this fantastic plot, which Miss Andre has just described to us.
Yes, I do.
All right, Mr. Regan, I give up. To what extent did you participate?
Mr. Flint, I merely provided the corpse.
Gee, and nothing else?
Nothing else.
I see. Exhibit B, please. Thank you. Mr. Regan, I will now show you a .32 caliber pistol. Do you recognize that gun?
No.
Perhaps if I refresh your memory. That is the same gun Miss Andre claimed she fired into the air that night in the penthouse. That is the same gun Miss Andre claimed was hers. Now do you recognize it?
No.
Affidavit, please, Laurie. Mr. Regan, I have here an affidavit which states a .32 caliber handgun, serial number CC3490, was sold by a store in New Jersey to Lawrence Regan.
Mr. Flint, I'd like to see that affidavit, please.
By all means, Counselor.
Thank you.
There is no CC3490 on this gun, Mr. District Attorney.
So it would appear, Mr. Regan. Have you ever heard of the electron microscope?
Gee, no, I haven't.
I thought probably not. The police have many remarkable tools at their disposal these days. It would appear that the serial number has been clumsily filed off of this gun. But when viewed on an electron microscope, it still plainly discloses the serial number CC3490.
This is satisfactory, Mr. Flint.
Thank you, Counselor. Submitted in evidence, Your Honor.
Accepted. Exhibit F.
Now, Mr. Regan, you admit to us of being in the penthouse on the night of January 16th.
I do.
Then, perhaps, you will share with us, where is your accomplice, the man who played the drunk?
Lefty O'Toole? I can give you Lefty's exact address. Evergreen Cemetery, Whitfield Family Memorial, which quite frankly is the swankiest place poor Lefty's ever been.
I see. Now let me get this straight. You claim the body buried in Evergreen Cemetery is Lefty O'Toole.
Correct. And in Faulkner's best suit. He's the same corpse that was pushed from the penthouse.
You also claim the body found in the burned airplane was Bjorn Faulkner.
Correct.
Mr. Regan, what is to prove that it isn't the other way around? Supposing you did steal Lefty O'Toole's body, what's to prove that you didn't plant the plane and the body in New Jersey and then come here today with this wild story in a desperate attempt to save your mistress? You've heard her tell us that you would do anything for her, lie for her, murder for her.
Objection.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Where's your real proof, Mr. Regan?
Mr. Flint, you are a district attorney, and I... well, you know what I am. We both have a lot of dirty work to do, such happens to be life, or most of it anyway. But even you must have felt the moment, you know? When the slate's just wiped clean, just a moment. And you find yourself doing things, well, not for your own interests, for someone else. I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's her only proof.
That is all, Mr. Regan.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
Any witnesses in rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution has one. We would call to the stand Roberta Van Rensselaer.
Roberta Van Rensselaer? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Certainly. Why not?
Would you please state your name?
Real or professional?
Both, if you don't mind.
Nah, I don't mind. My real name is Ruby O'Toole. But if we should ever get friendly, don't call me Ruby. I hate that name.
But you're professionally known as Roberta Van Rensselaer?
That's my nom de plume. I'm a terpsichorean.
You mean you dance?
Well, that's the common name for it.
Where were you last employed?
At the Club Chez O'Toole. No cover charge.
And who was your employer?
The owner, George Lefty O'Toole.
Were you related to him?
Nah, I was his wife.
Tell us, Miss Van Rensselaer, do you know Larry Regan?
Yeah, I've met the rat.
Oh, I take it from your answer that you don't like him much.
If we was cast off together on a lonely island, it would still be lonely.
Would you please share with us why you dislike him?
Because he killed Lefty O'Toole.
Objection. Strike the witness's last remark from the record.
Thank you,
Miss
Your
Van
Honor.
Rensselaer, please, you must forego your personal opinions and confine your answers to the questions.
Sure.
Would you please tell us, did your late husband, George Lefty O'Toole, and Larry Regan do business together?
Nah, if Lefty had stooped that low, he would have broke his back.
Then would you say that they were rivals?
Regan might like to think so, but Lefty just considered him an amusement, like golf or fishing or something.
When did you last see Larry Regan?
See him or hear from him?
See him.
I guess about a month before Lefty was rubbed out. Regan came over the club one night to see Lefty. And I put, Lefty had me sit at the table and listen. He always did that because he thought Regan was trying to muscle in.
Tell us, what did Mr. Regan want that night?
He said he wanted to sell out.
Really? Did that surprise you?
Honey, you could have carried me out in a spoon.
I see. Was your late husband interested in the proposition?
Nah, Lefty said he'd rather put his money in an S&L, whatever that was.
Did Mr. Regan say why he wanted to sell out?
His story was he's leaving the country for good. He described some chick he had on the run and a lot of important money she's gonna have, and how they was going to South America to put the equator between them and the income tax boys.
Did he say who this woman was?
Nah, but Lefty knew. He said it was some chick working in Faulkner's office, but it wouldn't do Regan no good because Faulkner would stop him.
I see. And how did Mr. Regan respond to that?
He said Faulkner was going away for good. And Lefty says, "You planning on erasing him or something?" And Regan answers, "Nah, he's gonna commit a fake suicide. And won't he be surprised when he finds it's real?"
Your Honor, we object. This is hearsay and not admissible.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Van Rensselaer, when did you hear from Mr. Regan last?
On January 16th, Regan phoned the house and asked for Lefty. I put Lefty on the phone, and after they talked, Lefty said he was going out to Sands Point to meet Regan and settle a deal.
So your husband, Lefty O'Toole, left to meet Larry Regan.
Yeah, to go to Long Island. He was iced on the Queensboro Bridge.
Iced. You mean he was killed?
Yeah, and an hour after, his body disappeared.
Thank you, Miss Van Rensselaer.
Anytime, sweetheart.
You are the widow of George O'Toole?
I'm wearing black, ain't I?
Is that a yes or a no, Miss Van Rensselaer?
Yeah.
And you admit you hate Lawrence Regan?
Oh, I'd swear to that.
Well, haven't you allowed that fact to influence your testimony?
How do you mean?
I mean, you're here to get revenge. You talk about things that you know nothing about. For example, you stated that Regan was losing money. How could you possibly know that?
We kept a book on Regan.
All right. You said your husband met his death on January 16th?
Yeah.
And it is rumored that he was killed by rival gangsters.
Yeah, and the man who did it was...
as Mr. Flint asked you to do. Confine yourselves to the questions we give you. Now, as I said, Miss Van Rensselaer, you stated that your husband was killed by a rival gangster.
It couldn't have possibly have been anyone else.
You didn't consider Regan a rival. Isn't that what you said?
You don't have to consider a skunk your rival, Ms. Stevens, just because you try to keep him off your property.
That's all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
Kill Nephew too is the dirtiest...
That's all, Miss Van Rensselaer. Your Honor, I have done with my testimony. Thank you.
What dirty chuck? Stop by the club sometime, honey.
Any more witnesses?
Your Honor, the defense would like to recall to the stand John Graham Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, have you any objection if I ask for a court order to examine the body in Evergreen Cemetery?
I have no objection, Miss Stevens, but that body has been cremated.
Cremated? And why was that done, Mr. Whitfield?
Well, the body was in such a condition that it seemed the best thing to do.
And for no other reason?
It's been a custom of our family for years.
Where were you on the night of January 16th, Mr. Whitfield?
I was at home.
And do you have any witnesses to prove that?
Miss Stevens, you must realize that I am not in the habit of providing myself with alibis. I've never had reasons to keep track of my activities and produce witnesses for them. But, if you insist, I believe I spoke to my daughter...
How many cars do you own, Mr. Whitfield?
4.
And what are they?
One of them is a black Cadillac, as you are evidently anxious to learn. May I remind you, Miss Stevens, it isn't the only black Cadillac in New York City.
You have just returned from California. Is that right?
Yes.
And you flew back in your own plane? You flew it yourself?
Yes,
And you are a licensed pilot then?
I am.
And yet that story of Mr. Regan's about you stealing his plane, flying it to New Jersey, and burning it is nothing but a lie in your opinion.
It is.
Then who wrote that check for $25,000?
I did.
You admit it.
I do.
Explain yourself.
We all know Larry Regan's profession. He had threatened to kidnap my daughter. I preferred to buy him off rather than take a chance on the life of my child. So, on January 6th, I wrote a check to Larry Regan for $25,000.
You mean January 16th?
No, Miss Stevens. January 6th.
Mr. Whitfield, the check is dated January 16th.
Yes. Regan has added a 1 and made it the 16th.
You're saying that Lawrence Regan changed the date?
You may call a handwriting expert and find out.
Thank you. Your daughter and your fortune are your most cherished possessions, aren't they?
They are.
Then what would you do to the man who stole your money and deserted your daughter for another woman?
Your Honor, please, we object.
Objection sustained.
You hated Faulkner, and you wanted to break him. You suspected his intentions of staging a suicide. The words Miss Youngquist heard you say prove it.
I suspected nothing of the kind.
Oh, really? On January 16th, 1992, didn't you spend the entire day following Faulkner?
Certainly not.
You didn't follow him when he left the penthouse that night.
No.
You had no information given to you on Faulkner at the time.
None.
You heard nothing unusual that day, Mr. Whitfield?
Not a thing.
Mr. Whitfield, you're saying that you didn't know about the $100 million he transferred to Buenos Aires.
I never heard of it.
Oh, my God! I killed him! I killed your father! I helped that man to kill him! The whole truth! So help me God! I didn't know! I see it now! He killed Faulkner! He lied! He killed
Your Honor, please.
He died because I told him!
Miss Youngquist, please. Your Honor, that's all. No more questions, Mr. Whitfield. Thank you very much.
No questions.
Please
Mr.
take a
Whitfield,
seat. Thank
please.
you. Miss Youngquist, you told Mr. Whitfield about the transfer.
He asked me many times about 100 million, where it's spent. I did not know it was a secret. That day he asked me about Buenos Aires. That day at noon, January 16th.
What kind of a frame-up is this?
You told Mr. Whitfield at noon.
Yes, God help me. I didn't know.
Thank you, Miss Ljungqvist.
Miss Ljungqvist, were you alone with Mr. Whitfield when you told him about the $100 million?
Yes?
Then it's the word of an ex-convict against the word of John Graham Whitfield.
Yes.
Thank you, Miss Ljungqvist. That is all.
The bailiff will escort Miss Ljungqvist out of the courtroom. Defense may proceed with closing argument.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in a few moments you will be called upon to decide the fate of this woman. And I am here to plead for her life. Karen Andre has confessed here to you many things which may arouse you against her. But she is not being tried for those things. She is being tried for the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. And for you to hold her guilty of that murder, you must convince yourselves of two things. One, she had a motive. And two, all the evidence proves, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she committed the crime. Let's take a look at the evidence. What concrete evidence has been given to you? Merely that Karen Andre pushed a body from a penthouse balcony. And we admit that. But we deny that it was the body of Bjorn Faulkner. Let's take a look at the motive now. The state claims that Mr. Faulkner had reformed his ways, that he had become a devoted husband, and that he was going to spend the rest of his life saving his unfortunate investors. Well, ladies and gentlemen, shortly after Mr. Faulkner's marriage to Miss Whitfield Faulkner, he failed to explain his absences to her night after night. Is that the act of a devoted husband? On January 16th, 1992, Bjorn Faulkner absconded with $100 million. Is that the act of a man trying to save his unfortunate investors? When Bjorn Faulkner realized that he could no longer hold off the collapse of his empire, he decided to stage a fake suicide. And to whom did he confide in his plans? His wife? No. Karen Andre. Who was to meet him in South America? His wife? Karen Andre. This woman had every possible advantage if Bjorn Faulkner had lived. She had no motive for killing him. We admit that Karen Andre helped Faulkner in his swindles. And we admit that Karen Andre lied at the inquest, but she lied because she thought Faulkner was alive. She was trying to save him. Have you been following the testimony? Have you been listening to the witnesses that have come up here? My client, Karen Andre, is the victim in this case. And I believe that it is you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who are on trial here tonight. It is your souls and your minds and even your compassion that will be brought to light when your decision has been rendered. And I am asking you for the verdict of not guilty. Thank you very much.
The district attorney may now conclude the case.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am not going to appeal to your souls, but to your reason alone. I am not going to play upon your sympathies, for the only things that concern you in this case are the facts. And as I list them for you, I would like you to recall that these are not manufactured alibis, but facts. Bjorn Faulkner was killed on January 16th. His body was pushed from the balcony of the penthouse on the Faulkner building by Karen Andre, and a detective on a nearby roof was an eyewitness to it, and that is a fact. He was already dead. He had been shot and the recently discharged gun was found in the penthouse by the police. Now, the state, the defense, would like you to believe that the gun was fired by Mr. Faulkner in an attempted suicide. But the only fingerprints on the gun were those of Karen Andre and no one else, and that is another fact. The gun was the property of Larry Regan, who admits to being in the penthouse on the night of January 16th, despite the fact that Miss Andre swore she had never seen him before. You heard the testimony of Miss Svensson, the housekeeper, who stated Larry Regan was in fact Karen Andre's lover. And it is evident that between the two of them, they conspired to steal the $100 million and send it to South America. Now, how did they get this sum of money? By forging the signature of John Graham Whitfield, and that is another fact, a fact Miss Andre admitted to you here on the witness stand. Now, why did they do all of this? The answer is so obvious. Karen Andre hated Bjorn Faulkner, hated him because he married another woman and then dismissed her. She wanted to accomplish two things. First, extract her revenge on Bjorn Faulkner, and then seize his money, thereby assuring herself of the life of depraved luxury to which she had become accustomed. All of this she planned with her new lover, Larry Regan. And so between the two of them, they concocted this diabolically clever alibi, this confusion of corpses, this cock and bull story, the sheer impudence of which very nearly carried it to success. Here are some more facts. On January 16th, George Lefty O'Toole was lured from his home in response to a telephone call from Larry Regan and was later found dead. On January 16th, the money, the $100 million, was sent to South America. On the night of January 16th, Bjorn Faulkner was killed. He was shot, and his body was hurled to the sidewalks of Broadway in the hopes that the condition of the body might both conceal the bullet wound and make identification impossible. On the night of January 16th, the body of George O'Toole was stolen and taken in an airplane by Larry Regan to New Jersey, where both the plane and the body were burned. And finally, a check for $25,000 was stolen from John Graham Whitfield by blackmail, and then the date changed in a ridiculous attempt to implicate him in the crime. These are the facts in this case. A case so strong that I can conceive of no other verdict except the one that I ask you to return. Guilty of murder in the first degree. I thank you for your attention. Thank you, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the bailiff will now escort you to the jury room. I shall ask you to consider your verdict carefully, omitting all personal prejudices or sympathies. I shall ask you to adhere strictly to the evidence presented and to the motives which may have caused the crime to be committed. You are to determine only whether the defendant, Karen Andre, is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. You may bring in a verdict of acquittal or of murder in the first degree.
All right.
He did not give anything. We didn't give anything.
private entrance rang. So I went and answered it. It was Miss Andre, and Mr. Faulkner was with her. I was surprised because Miss Andre has her own key, and most times she opens the door herself. There was 2 other gentlemen with them, and one of them was drunk.
I must admit that Mr. Faulkner had many qualities of which I could not approve. We were as different as 2 people could be. Above all, I believe in one's duty to others. Bjorn Faulkner believed in nothing but himself.
Before I could do anything, why, that fella Van Fleet rushed up to me, yelling how he'd seen Andre push Faulkner off the roof. So I made my way to the center of the crowd and nabbed her. Well, then she stood there and stared at me for a minute. Well, then she started laughing. I thought she'd gone nuts.
Certain peculiarities in the handwriting led me to the conclusion that the letter was forged. But I can compliment Miss Andre on her art. The difference is very slight.
No lights, but Karen Andre's white gown visible in the moonlight. A man in a tux, Faulkner leaning against the balcony. She pushes him with all her strength. He goes right over.
I found a body greatly mangled by a fall. There was a bullet wound in the region of the heart, but the actual cause of death was impossible to determine. It could have been the wound or the fall.
He kissed me goodbye and said that he would try to be home early. I followed him to the door and watched him drive away. I stood there for a few minutes thinking how happy we were, what a perfect dream our love was, a beautiful and uplifting relationship based on mutual trust. How did I know that her jealousy would bring about his death?
I did not know. I see it now. He killed Faulkner. He lied. He knew about the $100 million because I told him.
Before he know it, she learned so much about his business he cannot let her go. When she knows she got her claws tight on him, she make him spend much money on her. You try to count up all the money he based on that woman.
On January 16th, Regan phoned the house and asked for Lefty. I put Lefty on the phone, and after they talked, Lefty said he was going out to Sands Point to meet Regan and settle a deal.
But even you must have felt the moment. When the slate's just wiped clean, you know, just a moment. And you find yourself doing things. Well, not for your own interests. For someone else. I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.
I pushed man's body off the penthouse, but that body was dead before I touched it. It was not Bjorn Faulkner.
seated. The defendant will rise and face the jury. Madam Foreman, do you find the defendant, Karen Andre, guilty or not guilty of murder in the first degree? What say you?
On the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Andre, not guilty.
Madam Foreman, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you very much for your service in this case. I'm very grateful for your devotion and attention. You are hereby released from your responsibilities. Please remain seated until the bailiff escorts you out.
Court stands adjourned. All rise. You may be seated.
No clapping, Judge. Thank you so much. Grab that feather. Thank you. Grab the feather. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stop by the club anytime, darling.